Hi, I'm Kerry Ann King, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and this time around, I'm joined by Kerry Ann King. Kerry Ann is the founder and CEO of Eluminate Labs. We touch on what Eluminate Labs is and what they're working on. They're a software development company dedicated to building applications that decolonize tech, creating inclusive solutions for human well-being. And after more than a decade working inside the tech industry to promote human-centered approaches to well-being, Kerry Ann felt it was necessary to break free from the exploitative foundations of big tech to build applications that put people and their well-being first. It's very clear with my conversation and having, even the preamble with Kerry Ann that she really is passionate about this. We dive into kind of this transactional element that comes along with to-do lists and productivity and how it may not be serving us. We dive into the arts in particular, which I think is super helpful, and why we maybe don't look to the arts nearly as much for qualitative productivity as opposed to, other areas within the world, and why maybe they get the short shrift. We also dive in a little bit near the tail end, so you'll want to stick around, about the mobile app Fin, which is a positive productivity app, and it is the debut offering of Illuminate Labs. Fin helps people who struggle with productivity learn about their productivity style through feedback and coaching, so be sure to stick around to the end of the episode for that. But for now, let's get into a rather interesting and productive, as it should be, conversation with Kerry Ann King. Kerry Ann, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. And a little preamble before we hit record to get to know each other a little bit better before we reveal this conversation to the world.
Yeah, no, it's been great. And I'm super excited to talk to you. I've been loving the podcast.
So I often get this question when people interview me and they say, well, what got you into productivity? And while it turns into an origin story, and it's great, I've shared it 23 different ways and 4 more additional ways and so on and so forth. I'd rather do a different spin on this question because you've been exploring this arena for quite some time. My question for you is, what has kept you in the realm of productivity? What has kept you fascinated by it?
Well, it's interesting. I think what's really continued to excite me about it is that I see my ability to continue to change. And to me, that's a message. Like, if there's one message from this podcast that people get, is that it is never too late. It is never too early. There is always room to move and change and do things differently. And that's what excites me about it.
You live in a very frenetic city.
No, really?
Yeah, a little bit. New York City, my son and I've been there a handful of times. My son and I were there a couple of years ago. And I wanted him to experience that Eastern Seaboard kind of mentality because living, where I live, on the west coast of Canada, and specifically on an island, which is like basically living on the chillest part of the chillest part of Canada in a manner of speaking. Although the Maritimes, which, we discussed the Maritimes earlier, New Brunswick, and they are a different kind of chill on the Eastern Seaboard. It's a very different, I mean, we can get into the dynamics there as well, but, I remember reading the book Here is New York, and, the idea behind only certain people will make it in that environment. Not everybody is cut out to be a New Yorker. And it got me thinking about, especially, the idea of prioritization and what people think about productivity in terms of checking off a lot of boxes. What that environment seems to cater to that. It's almost as if, the measurables are not about the quality or the impact of what you're doing, but just the degree of how much you're doing.
Busy.
Yeah.
Busy.
Yeah. Did you find that it lends itself to that? Like when you're working with people or you've seen people, like there is this vibration there that is, you can leverage certainly, but there's also some detriment to it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what I've noticed, particularly, there's been a cultural shift. I've lived here my entire life. And there has been a cultural shift more towards busy and less towards impact, I think. And maybe that's happening in culture in general. But, I remember the New York where when I was a kid, I would go with my mother to Merce Cunningham. If you don't know who Merce Cunningham is, he was a choreographer who's very famous in the modern dance world in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm dating myself, but like I said, there's always room to move and change and grow. Um, but I was 9 years old going to Merce Cunningham's studio, and there was a woman like standing on one leg and tweeting like a bird for 45 minutes, and that's what they were doing. So there was kind of, I think there was more space in New York for thinking more about impact and being in the soup of people who were interested in doing things that were cool. I think partly because of the way the economics of New York City has changed, we've moved more towards you need to be doing and be busy so that you can be out doing busy things, not consuming. It's become much more consumerist and extractive as opposed to being here to so that you could be around other people who were creative or ambitious or exciting or whatever it was you were looking for. So, and I do think that there's a little bit of difficulty in kind of holding the line if it takes energy to hold the line of I'm interested in being impactful as opposed to I'm interested in going to every restaurant that everybody talks about or every nightclub or every play or so it is. I think it's not without planning that you continue to be a person who thinks about impact in a place like this.
It's development over upkeep in a way.
Exactly. And to me, it's a shame, right? It's a shame that I have 4 kids who are, basically 4 wanting to be artists. And New York is becoming a place where they can't build their careers because it's too expensive. It's too all of the things that come with that extractive approach to life and livelihood makes it very difficult for people to be innovative. In fact, that's one of the reasons, one of the real important things to me about the company we started is that we are about impact. We are not, when people ask me, what's your exit strategy? Like I'm building a startup because I want to build a business that's going to sustain me and the people who work for me and have a positive impact in the world, not because I'm hoping that Microsoft will buy my product.
Right.
It's not my goal.
Well, if you go in with that, I mean, the outcome that you have in mind can not only cloud, but almost divert the actual intention behind building it in the first place. If you're building it just to get out of it, it'll show.
Exactly. And I think we've begun to see, like, if you look at what's happening in the VC space right now, the biggest growth area that was just in the New York Times a few months ago, the biggest growth area in startups is people who help you wind down your startup.
Yeah.
Like that's, because, we went through this period where it was like, we're going to throw buckets of money at this somewhat interesting idea because we know this guy's dad and they rent office space and buy furniture and do something that's not a sustainable business. And that's, to me, something that I'm completely uninterested in. This idea that you build things to basically throw them away at the end of what you see as the useful lifespan of the business.
Well, and I think that's the intersection of art and commerce too, right? Artists typically, and I mean, having, spent time in the arts industry, being a writer myself, there is something about the legacy of your work, big or small. I mean, whatever you leave behind is a legacy and you don't get to necessarily shape it. You can have a hand in it, but ultimately, once something's out in the world, it's no longer yours, right? It's now something that you can nurture, or you can, again, kind of eliminate. And I think that the commerce part is when you say, okay, I've made this thing, let's make another thing that will. It's very challenging to steer clear of the let's make something else to make money versus I'm an artist, let me make something else to make something else, right?
Exactly. And I think that I think we are seeing, so to me, there's a big part of the way I understand productivity is through the lens of extractive practices versus building practices,
Right.
right? And I think we evaluate companies based on extractive metrics, right? How much value are they extracting out of their consumers, their workers, all of those things. And then we end up visiting that on ourselves. What can I extract out of myself? And I think that's where we do get that busy, busy, busy sometimes in the way people approach their day to day way of getting things done, right? I did a bunch. I extracted value from myself, but did I achieve a goal that I was really interested in achieving?
Yeah. You know, as you're talking about this, it's we want more relational and less transactional. And the thing about quantitative stuff, which is, again, prescribing things to a date and having a certain number of things. And once you get that quantitative, it's just an easier metric to go down because it's so objective, right? You could say, well, I did these 43 things. Yes, but you raised 4 kids, right? So what was more, you know what I mean? Like the 4 kid long haul raising versus the thousands of other things you did in during that season of life, I think is if you do a comparison, I would imagine, unless of course you've got narcissistic qualities that are more about processing your parenting as opposed to being a parent, like the doing of parenting as opposed to being. I would imagine, and we were talking about this just before we hit record, like the idea of, okay, I'm now 50, my kids are in that later phase, my daughter's off at college, my son is in high school, and just upon reflection and introspection, realizing that the 15 years to this point, I treated a very specific way, maybe both consciously and subconsciously, because my real aim was to be the parent that was home, that they could say, hey, dad's home. We don't need to worry about this. Or if dinner needs to be made, dad will do it, because mom's working and so on and so forth. So it became almost, especially when you're faced with, this is what I think empty nest syndrome is kind of when you're looking around your house and you're like, where are the things that I did? Where are the things that I made and why are they gone? And what do I fill them with now? And it's the retrospective nature of me walking into my daughter's bedroom and having it be empty. I'm not looking at okay, what do I do now? I'm more looking at what am I what did I do to get to this point where I'm in this room right now and she's off in Montreal at university, and really just appreciating the season that I'm in. And the seasons are not, yes, you could argue, people are like, well, the season starts, you know, what is it? September 21st is the beginning of fall. Yeah, but most people equate fall with like the beginning of September, right? So there is some tolerance into what you think about that. It's when we get too precise, I think we run into these issues of precision and art doesn't want precision necessarily. It can benefit from it, but it's more about, it's not about that.
Well, it's interesting. I feel like it's for me, it's a balance. So
Sure.
I am definitely an artistic person. I've worked as a choreographer. I'm, part of the reason, which would serve me really well in the
Hmm.
corporate world, right? Because I love, I'm like Tinkerbell. If people aren't applauding, I don't exist. So I love like being the focus,
Yeah.
which is great if you're a leader. Um, but there's also for me, I've always really loved optimizing things. And I
Mhm.
actually do think that that is part of the artistic process. When
Sure.
you are working on a piece, you do tend to like continue to improve it, continue to think about it. Um, I forget who said it. Some artist said, you never finish a painting, you just give up." Like
Yeah,
there
yeah,
is,
but it's because the it's iterative. It's consistently
yeah,
iterative.
it's an iterative process. And for me, that having, tracking things has always been a part of how I do that. Like when I was a kid in ballet class, like how high was my leg today? How did I stretch? How like high is my leg tomorrow? Even as a teenager, I actually like I had a very long subway commute. I had to go from the West Village to the Upper East Side, and there's an old Woody Allen joke. Sometimes the fastest way to get across town is to be reincarnated.
Mm.
Like so, I had to go from all the way south to pretty far north and all the way across town. And I actually got a stopwatch and started timing like the different possible routes to figure out how I could get to school the most efficiently. So for me, those two things kind of live together.
Which is
The
which is tricky. It's good, but it's also tricky because I feel the same way. Like there's a rigidity to the tracking, right? It's fixed, but the path is dynamic to get there. The path is very like everything around it is dynamic. So you're searching, and maybe this is part of the artist's path in a way, is you're trying to cultivate certainty where certainty can be found because there's so much around the process, around everything that's uncertain. So and that's what objective numbers, like I did this. So there's an aspirational element to it that you can touch and feel and explain to others too.
I think that's true. And I think it's very, having been in a position where I have to evaluate the work of a large group of people,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of metrics, right? Like it is very, like when there was a point where I was managing a couple hundred group fitness instructors across the globe, I could not have done that one person at a time,
Right.
right? It would have been impossible. Um, but for myself, the biggest thing about metrics is the insights that they give me. Like I'm a very big fan. Like I journal very quick, like not I'm not like writing dear diary, I felt so sad today. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm like these are the things I wanted to do, these are the things that I did. Having that available to me to provide me with insights is really important. And the the example I use is sometimes is when I was kind of like in my biggest, most kind of frenetic role with Exos at Google, I would find myself at the office at 6:30 on a Friday, and I would just like people would be leaving, people would be coming through the office with beers and funny hats, like whatever it was, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd be sitting there like working, working, working. And I would feel so bad about myself. Like, what's wrong with me? Am I wasting my time all week? Why am I doing this? And I finally realized that what was happening was that was when my husband got home early. Fridays was the day that my husband got home early. And it was the day that I knew everybody was going to get a good dinner. Everybody was going to get hugs. They were going to do something fun. I didn't have to be focused on what was going to happen next. So it was my heads down time. And having that insight was so powerful because, first of all, it allowed me to let go of the like, everybody else is leaving, is partying, and I'm sitting here still working. This is my time.
Yeah.
Some other time is their time, and this is my time. But then it also allowed me to have a conversation with my partner, right? I could say to him, like, this is my time. So I just want you to know I'm not like staying at the office because I'm avoiding coming home. I'm staying at the office because I'm really getting things done. And it led to like this great dynamic where he would, say to me, like, keep going. We're great. You'd send me like words, we're making cookies. Like, you're fine. Just keep going.
Yep.
So like for me, that's what the data provides, is the insights into why we're doing things, how things are going, where.
There's a validation and permissiveness around it too. And it's interesting as you're thinking about this, the reason that quantitative metrics, those kind of metrics work for, especially in the realm of art, so theater, music, all that stuff, is those things are so emotionally driven and emotionally charged that you need something that they almost act as grounding elements. They're always like, well, hold up. Let's see what the data provides, which is interesting, because I think if you go too far in the other direction, then you end up with something that's more antiseptic and not really there's a lack of, it seems more manufactured than anything else. But there's that emotional component that could drive us into, and I mean, I know I've spoken to plenty of writers about this, or bloggers, or what have you, that once a piece of art, once they put something out into the world, oh, that's out there now, let's move on to the next. And you're like, well, hold up. The data should tell, like, I learned this was, no, I don't need to make something new every single time. Back to the iterative process. I can improve upon something that's out there. And that fills that cup to a degree in the same way that just making something brand new does. And that took a while for me to figure that out. The logic and reason and all that stuff were there showing me that, but the emotion was like, yeah, but it's not new. It's not something that was like the smash out of the park kind of thing that you would, but not, I mean, if you look at statistically, whether it's a filmmaker, an artist, whatever, those hits are like little blips on the radar compared to all the other stuff that didn't quite knock it out of the park during its first go round.
Well, and I'm like, I say this constantly to people that I work with. Comparison is the thief of joy,
Yeah.
right? I'm not interested in, particularly when I'm thinking about myself, I'm not interested in like compare, like, I'm not like saying like, I slept this much. How much did you sleep?
Yeah. Yep.
That, or how much do other people like me sleep? Am I doing as well as the other people who were sleeping?
or am I being as good a parent? Because, and that, again, reflecting back on whoa, my daughter's gone now. I'm able to look back on those 15 years that, she was, and obviously longer, but I'm like, okay, so there were times during that process where I was comparing myself to other people that were on similar journeys, not the same journey, because we're not all on the same journey, and I would beat myself up a bit. And I'm like, well, but again, hindsight gives you perspective. And I'm able to now reconcile, again, not completely, that, oh, well, that wasn't my main job back then. Like and then not wallowing in imagine how much more I would have gotten out of it if I had only known that back then. No, my kids aren't going, you never spent any time with me, or you never did any of that. It's more, again, we tend to be our own worst critics, right?
Well, and that's, I think, another reason, particularly with some of the people I coach in terms of productivity. And I think I think it's something that happens to women. I'm just going to say, like, women who have family obligations in particular. There's this sense that, but I think it also happens to all of us. There's a sense I'm never doing enough.
Right.
I'm never, ever doing enough. And what happens when you get someone to start writing down what they actually did, they can have this insight of, oh,
yep,
I do a lot. And sometimes that a lot ought to be enough. And I can be proud of what I've done rather than constantly looking for what I didn't do.
Right.
And that, for me, I think helping people to reduce that sense of anxiety, like, there's what didn't I do? And you mentioned being in New York City. this is kind of a New York problem, right? I
Mm.
could have done this. I should have done that. Why didn't I? You know what? Actually, you accomplished a lot. Remember that these things made you feel good. These things made you feel proud rather than be so focused on what you didn't accomplish and what you didn't do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the, and again, when you say it's a New York problem, it's the optics of it. That's, I think, part of it, right? Um, as we get close to wrapping up, I got a couple more things to discuss with you. First off, and we'll get into Finn because I want to talk a bit about the approach and the app that you put into, and we'll link to it obviously in the show notes. But as soon as Kerry Ann, as soon as I started to look into your work and read your bio, I couldn't help but think about people like Twyla Tharp, right? Who wrote the Creative Habit, which is, a lot of creative artists have used to kind of go beyond the dance aspect, and use it towards, being a productive artist. Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. And then Rick Rubin putting out the Creative Act, A Way of Being not too long ago. And I find that I love all of those, but it's interesting to me that those books don't get nearly the kind of attention that, say, typical business books around productivity get. And for those that are listening right now that have not looked into looked at The Creative Habit by Twyla Tharp, and looked at Rick Rubin's book, looked at, but they've maybe explored the Stoics, which is, again, another, like timeless philosophy that people are now applying. What are some of the things for someone that's listening that said, I've never heard of Twyla Tharp or Rick Rubin's, but like what can they tell me that I'm not getting from, let's say, a David Allen or a Cal Newport or an Ali Abdaal or Tiago Forte or Mike Vardy or any of these people that are kind of espousing, productivity philosophies or approaches that may not necessarily jive with their artistic sensibilities?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like we do give the arts short shrift in
Mm-hmm.
terms of productivity. When I was a kid, my mother was running her own business. She had a successful consulting business, and she would only hire dancers to be her personal assistants because she said that dancers were disciplined, they knew how to work hard, they were intelligent and driven. So she hired dancers. And I think that, part of it is just what we're exposed to, right?
Right.
Like I'm here in the US, arts education has basically been blown to pieces since, even when I was a child, and we don't understand the repetitive effort that goes into becoming a great dancer, a great pianist, a great choreographer, a great painter. Like there is so much grit and effort that goes into that level of creativity that people aren't exposed to anymore.
Yeah.
That I think it allows us to forget how important and how powerful those things are for teaching us that sort of persistence. And really, whatever the goal is, whether your goal is to make $100 million or raise great kids or create something that's going to change the world, whatever it is, what you need primarily is persistence.
Yeah. And
So,
what's interesting is we tend to celebrate athletes over artists, which is interesting because, again, this goes back to I finished the race in this time. The final score was this. There's more objective, extractive results that you see because there's a scoring mechanism. Whereas with arts, you don't get people try. You could see somebody that would go see the new Joker movie and go, oh my God, it was awful. And it's getting this kind of cinema score and Rotten Tomatoes, et cetera, et cetera. But then you've got a filmmaker who goes, it's honestly one of the best movies I've seen this year. So then you're like, oh, well, how do I evaluate it? Right? Like, should I go spend my money at the theater or should I wait? It's interesting because you can't quantify that in the same way that you say, again, athletic competitions, right?
So, but what you can't quantify is your personal experience of
Right.
it,
Right.
right? But
Right.
what you can quantify is all sorts of other things about it, right?
Sure.
What the work that went into it is
Hmm.
quantifiable. The references, I haven't seen that movie, but I know from reading the reviews that it has incredibly profound, detailed references to other filmmakers and other
Yeah.
uh, famous movies. So this, it's a more difficult thing to focus on and quantify, right?
Right.
But it is a form of quantification.
Well, I think
Like
the
one of
ar-
the
the
things,
the artist can. I think the artist can. I think it's the people on the other side that are seeing it on display that don't. I mean, it's the reason why you have people say, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm spending this much on concert tickets." Ticketmaster and all those companies aside, you're paying for all of the lessons, all of the gigs that got to that point. So there is a cumulative aspect to it, but they're just seeing it at value, going, "That person's not worth this much money to me." But that doesn't mean that that person isn't worth that, and that gets to the heart of, well, it's coming from the opinion of the person as opposed to, say, the fact or even the merit.
yes, and I think that that's part of the difficulty is when you don't have exposure to creating art.
Right.
There was a time, like if it were even 100 years ago, um, we both would have definitely played an instrument or sung on a regular basis, right? Because
Yep.
it was the only way to have that kind of entertainment
Yep.
frequently, right? We would have, you know, if depending upon my class and station as a woman, I would have learned to paint watercolors and learn several languages, like we don't expose ourselves to those experiences as much. And I think we miss out
Hmm.
on because the essence, I love sport. Hard Knocks on HBO is
Hmm.
one of my favorite shows, partly because the way NFL players understand using their bodies and the determination and grit they show to move through painful experiences in order to achieve what they want to achieve. It's almost identical to the way ballerinas are about
Yeah.
their bodies
Yeah.
and the way they behave.
It's
It's
fa-
it's very similar.
when people say, "Oh, Smash Mouth football," all that stuff, but you read about like books by like Tony Dungy and Bill Walsh, and they're talking about the very precise movements, and you have to know the playbook and so on and so forth. And some of these guys are scoring like high levels on the Wonderlic test and things of that nature. You can't. I love one of the most interesting things I've tried to do in recent years is understand how to read what the defense is going to do compared to when I'm watching TV. And I'm like, how in the world are they doing this in the heat of the moment in real time? And it literally brings me back to when I was doing improv on stage, right? You know the ground rules. You know what, I mean, yes, and, no blocking, no pimping. Like you can bend some rules, which we've seen, which is often leads to the funniest moments in improv. But if you're not following the fundamentals, then the whole thing will fall apart. And that's kind of when you see in football a broken play, which happens quite frequently. It's up to the players at that point. Like, I'm a Bengals fan. Joe Burrow's like, "Oh, I got a busted play. What do I do?" And he throws it or he runs it, and you're like, he made something out of nothing. That only comes from that that understanding of the playbook, the nuances of the game, all that stuff, which people don't, and 35 seconds is not a lot of time to go from one play to the other. Like, it's not.
Exactly. And that's but they do a lot of quantification. And that's, you can relate that to other kinds of improv, right?
Yep.
Jazz improvisation. There is the thing that allows you to improv, whether you are in a board meeting and someone asks a question you weren't ready for, or you're on the field and the play is broken, or you are in an ensemble improvising comedy, music, whatever it is, what allows you to have that ability to bring something out of nothing is a profound understanding of the project that you're doing, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
And that is built on regularity, persistence, grit, curiosity. One of my favorite, I forget who, if somebody was on like the halftime show, like talking about Tom Brady when he was the um, second string quarterback. I forget where he was. I love football, but I'm
For
not
the
good at
Patriots
that.
when he was the backup to Drew
Yeah.
Bledsoe.
No,
Yep.
when he was a backup quarterback, and how he was hungry, curious, wanting feedback, wanting information, wanting to know, and how important that was. And that works for everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That desire to understand.
Kerry Ann, before I let you go, I want you to touch on a little bit about, so it's obviously Eluminate Labs is the name of the company. And you've got Finn, which is, again, an app, which, helping to understand your productivity style is something that I think, again, people should explore a little bit, right? Because it's not a one size fits all situation. So before we wrap up, just can you touch a little bit about Finn and the work that you're doing? And then where can people obviously keep up with the work that you're doing and keep up with you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Finn really grew out of a collaboration that I did with a friend of mine who's an ex-Googler, an engineer, and his experience of his ADHD, my experience of my learning disabled life, and understanding that for us, there was there were all these pieces of advice about how to get things done and be more productive. And it almost felt like a crapshoot.
Right.
Like, I remember once somebody told me you should do time blocking. And I had this one task that I had to do for payroll. And I was like, I'm going to time block this like the day before payroll is due, and then I'll do it every time. It was like I was allergic to doing it at the time. It was like my brain was just like, you can't tell me what to do, calendar. I'm not going to do it now. I'm going to do it later. And so I think for all of us, particularly those of us who struggle a little bit with productivity, really doing self observation, understanding whether or not things are working for you or not is almost half the battle.
Right.
So we really designed Finn with that in mind, kind of more. So there is a tracking element. Like sometimes I call it Fitbit for your tasks, because it will tell you like how much you did yesterday. But we have a couple of features that are really important to me. One is snoozing and skipping. If you
Right.
have a routine or a task and you snooze it or skip it, you don't get penalized because you've made a conscious decision about what to do about it. Not, like to me, the problem is if you made a conscious decision, if you decide that you never want to do this thing again, more power to you. You made a decision. That, and then we also ask people to choose emojis associated with when they finish something and also when they skip something, so that you can start to build some awareness. Like if you're skipping file my taxes and you keep hitting confused, well, the discussion we need to have is, why are you confused?
Yeah.
And can we solve the confusion? Because, it's pretty well documented in the literature. Procrastination is frequently avoidance of a negative emotion.
Yeah.
So once you start identifying those negative emotions, you can begin to start to solution for the negative emotion rather than just avoid the negative emotion by avoiding the task.
Kerry Ann, this has been great. I know we could talk. We didn't really scratch the surface of some of the stuff I wanted to get into, but we'll have to have you back on again to dive in a bit deeper next time. And at that time, we'll be in a different season. My daughter will be, into university. My son, who knows where he'll be at. He's doing musical theater, actually, which is not something I predicted for him. And it's kind of came out of left field, and it's great because I did musical theater in high school too. So he's heavily involved in the arts, but also likes to build. Yeah, he's right into The musical they're doing this year is Prom, which is the one that they did. They're doing Prom, and he, again, speaking of going against the grain, he auditioned when, and I'm gonna put this in air quotes, when grade 9s aren't supposed to, but that I think is more of a social thing than an actual rule. And he got a speaking part, and he's got a bit of a solo in his first year. So I'm like, there we go. I'm excited. But Kerry Ann, thanks again for taking the time. I appreciate it. It's always good to have conversations around this kind of stuff, especially when there's so many nuances around this particular field that we're spending time in. Where can people keep up with the work you're doing and connect with you?
So you can always follow Eluminate Labs, Finn, and me on LinkedIn. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. We're not on X or TikTok because I just can't handle it. Right now, the app is in beta, so it's free in the store. There's free coaching available in the app if you're interested. It's all digital, so someone reaching in, looking at your list and saying things like, that's a project, not a task, all the things that, us productivity people kind of focus on when we see another person's list.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been great. Thanks so much again, Kerry Ann, for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thank you. This has been so much fun.
Thanks to Kerry Ann for joining me today. You can go to mikevardy.com/podcast593 to check out the show notes, relevant links, and all things related to this episode. Of course, you can also do that wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, even YouTube. And while you're doing that, subscribe to the show. That way you won't miss a single episode of what's to come. It's one way to support the show. And the show has been around for a while. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. So you'll be able to search through the archives fairly easily, catch up on shows that you might have missed, as well as make sure you don't miss a single episode of what's to come. So that's one way to support the show, is to subscribe to the show. Another is to check out the sponsors that you heard during our conversation today. Just go to mikevardy.com/podcast sponsors. Click on any of the sponsors that you feel are aligned with what you want to do or really resonated with you, and that way they know that we sent you there. That's it for this episode. Thanks again for joining me. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.